Hey guys, today we're going to be continuing our video series on writing the essay. Now, last time we talked about thesis statements, but today we're moving past the thesis and we're going to talk about defining points and gathering evidence. So once you figure out exactly what you want to argue in the essay, this is the next step that you would take. So like I said, in our last video, we talked about a thesis statement. And so your thesis statement for this type of essay would just be which argument is better and why. So remember, they give you two articles. You have to decide which one you think is a stronger argument or a better argument, and you need to explain why. So you're picking one or the other. Why is it that you would say that that one is better or that one is stronger? And so basically your thesis is in two parts. It says what your position or your opinion is. So whose article you think is better or stronger, and then the reasons why. Is it because one has more evidence? Is it because one is better supported? Is it because one has a more academic tone or a better tone than the other one? So that's all your thesis is. And again, if you haven't watched the video on thesis statements, I highly suggest you pause this video and go back and watch that one before you dive into this one. So after you develop your thesis, you need to figure out what you're going to say in your essay. So the first thing that you want to do is figure out what points you are going to compare and contrast. So what is it that's different about those two essays? What is it that makes one better than the other? So what specifically are you going to look at when you think about what they have in common and what is different about them? And so after you figure out what you're going to talk about, what they have in common and what's different, you need to gather textual evidence. And all textual evidence means is just quotes and just information from the actual articles that they give you. Because you can't just say, oh, this person has a sarcastic tone and this one doesn't. You have to prove it. And so you prove it by finding text from those articles and showing your readers, hey, this is where it is. Here's my evidence. And so to do that, you really want to reread the passages. So especially when you're writing the essay, it is a good idea to not just skim through the readings and then write your essay. You need to read it several times. One, to make sure that you understand what you're reading, you understand the arguments that they're making, but also you read for different purposes. So the first few times you might read to understand what they're talking about. And then maybe the next couple times you are reading to look for weaknesses or to look for things to compare or to look for specific evidence to use in your essay. And so when you're rereading it, figure out what their arguments are. Who's saying what? What's their position? Why do they think this way? And then what kind of evidence are they using? Are they using personal stories? Are they using facts? Did they interview somebody and put that as evidence in their essay? So these are things to look for as you go through and read these articles after you've developed your thesis statement. And so one thing that you want to do when you're reading the articles for maybe the second or third time, note how their reasons and their evidence are alike or different. So what are things that are similar? What is different? And so as you note how their reasons are different, so like their opinions, as you note what different types of evidence they use, look for examples also of rhetorical techniques. And so rhetorical techniques are how they say things, how they present their argument, what type of writing style do they use. For instance, their tone. Do they sound sarcastic or do they have more of an academic tone? Do they sound like they're really invested in this, or do they come off as aloof or like they don't care? So look for those types of things as you read as well. And so another thing that you can do, you can use specific points of comparison and contrast between the passages in their argument. So for instance, this person over here says that you should never eat fast food. This person over here says that it's okay in moderation. You can compare the points that they make too. It's like, okay, this guy says you should never eat fast food, but that isn't very realistic. I mean, we're all on the go. We have stuff to do. So it's not realistic to say never eat fast food ever. It's more realistic to say, hey, moderation. If you do, choose healthier foods, that type of thing. And then use examples from each passage to prove each point that you make. So you can't just say this person has a sarcastic tone, but this author over here has more of an academic tone. You need to use examples to prove that. So find a quote that shows that that author sounds sarcastic, and find a quote from the other author that shows that they have an academic tone. So find quotes and things from the articles to actually prove that. That's what your essay graders are looking for, that you can prove, that you can defend, that you can find evidence from the essays to actually prove what you're trying to say. For instance, so in this case, I don't necessarily have articles to look at, but we will for our next example. Let's say that we're comparing living in a dorm when you go to college versus commuting, so driving to school every day. So maybe I want to compare this idea of costs. Like, okay, room and board versus gas money. So if you live at college, you have to pay for housing, so you have to pay for your dorm, and you're also probably going to have to pay for a meal plan. But if you're commuting, you don't have to pay for that, but you do have to pay for gas. Or maybe I want to compare the time that it takes to get to class. If you live in a dorm, it doesn't take very long to walk to class, maybe like just a couple minutes. When I was in college, my freshman dorm was actually connected to the English building where most of my classes were. So all I had to do was walk across the stairwell, and that was it, and I was there. Versus your commute time. Maybe it takes 30 minutes to get there. Maybe it takes 45 minutes. Maybe it only takes 5. Maybe it takes 10. And another thing that you can compare is maybe you have a roommate if you live in a dorm, or maybe you live alone if you're commuting. So you have an apartment to yourself or a house to yourself versus having to live with a stranger. So these are just different things that you could compare. So let's say that we're talking about walking to class versus commuting. So depending on the college that you go to, walking from your dorm to class can only take a few minutes. So for instance, I went to Lindsey Wilson College for my undergrad. It took maybe 2 minutes to go from your dorm to the building you were in. Even less than that if you were in the freshman girls dorm and you went to the English building. They were connected. So it does not take long to get there at all. It only takes a few minutes. But if you're driving to school with traffic, it could take up to 45 minutes or more, depending on how far you're having to go away. Maybe you live in a different county, and you've got to account for traffic. I know I don't live very far from where I work, but when school's going on, traffic is really, really awful. Or, maybe even talk about how you have to spend time finding a parking spot. You don't have to do that if you are living on campus. You don't have to waste your time finding a parking spot. You just go from your dorm to class. Or maybe you have to walk far anyway. So if you're a commuter, maybe you can't find a spot that is close to where your classes are. So you end up having to walk far anyway, probably farther than you'd even have to walk if you lived on campus, going from your dorm to your building. So these are things, my point that I'm comparing is the walk to class versus commuting, and then all of this is just evidence I'm using to back that up. Now, if I had actual articles, I'd find like quotes from the articles. So here's some more evidence. So these are things that I found online. So evidence, maybe I'm talking about fuel costs. So let's say that you live 25 miles from your college and you're commuting. So gas is $2.01 a gallon in Kentucky right now. That's average. Let's say that you drive a Kia Soul and that you live 40 minutes away. So 40 minutes or 25 miles away from campus. So if that's the kind of car that you have, and if that's how far you're having to commute, and you go 4 days a week, you are spending $33.50 a month just on gas. But then also think about car maintenance. The more miles you put on your car, the more oil changes you're going to have. So you're going to have to get your oil changed more often. You're going to be spending more money on that. It could even make your car insurance more expensive. So some insurance companies take your annual mileage into account. And sometimes they ask about, like, what's the purpose of driving? And so that could even add to your premiums. Oh, you're driving 40 minutes every single day to go to class versus maybe once a week to drive to your college campus and live in your dorm. They're going to take that into account, and that could even make your premiums go up. So here's an example of what we might see on the actual GED. So these were just examples of an argument I came up with. But let's say that we're actually having to compare two written pieces, like on the GED. So here I've got those two articles that we had from the thesis video. I'll Never Teach Online Again and The Benefits of Online Education. So we have, here's the first part, and then here is the second part of those two articles. So pause the video, and I want you to read these two passages for me. So first page, second page. Okay, so after you have taken the time to read those two articles, we are going to start comparing them. So the first thing that I want to compare is the claim that they make. So we're going to be comparing Clift and Jones. So Clift is going to be on the left, and Jones is going to be on the right. So what is different about the claims or the point of views that they have? And now these are just the ones that I decided to use. You could come up with different points of comparison. It is up to you. So under their claim or their point of view, so what Clift is focusing on the author's frustration as a teacher. And then Jones is focusing on the positive experiences of others. So Jones is talking about the positive experience, but it's others' experience. It's not theirs. It's not something that they actually experience, that they have any firsthand knowledge of. But Clift is focusing on their own actual frustration as a teacher, her experience as a teacher. So, claims it is her experience as a teacher. So basically, Jones is for it, Clift is against it. Now, what about their reasons? What are some different things that we could talk about with their reasons? So again, pause the video, maybe go back and look. So one thing that Clift brings up when it comes to the differences, so the different reasons that Clift gives, one thing that she brings up is the quality of materials. And then Clift also brings up insufficient pay. So Clift is saying that teachers aren't getting paid enough for the extra work that they are putting in. But Jones, on the other hand, Jones is focusing on, so like we said, Jones is focusing on the positive experiences. So Jones talks about the flexibility of online learning, as well as self-management. So you're in charge of it. You can do your work whenever you want to. Now, another thing that is different about these two things is the tone. So, for instance, Clift has a very negative tone. Clift doesn't really say anything positive about online learning. However, Jones is more upbeat and positive. We could also say that Clift is frustrated. And then another thing that is different that we could compare is the type of support or the type of evidence. So, for instance, Jones uses like some facts. So, for instance, Jones has a fact in here: 32% of college students take at least one online class. They interviewed this student named Rebecca, So this one uses interviews and facts or statistics. However, if we go over and we look at Cliff's, is Cliff using anybody else's evidence or anybody else's opinions to support her? No, Cliff is only using her own experiences and her own opinions. And so these would be things that we would talk about in our essay. So hopefully our next video will be talking about how to actually write this essay. And so what we would do, each of these points of comparison that we have, these would each be paragraphs that we would discuss in our essay. So these would be like the body paragraphs of our essay. And again, we'll get to this in our next video. For instance, in one paragraph, we talk about the different claims. So we would say, here's what Cliff's claim is like, here's what Joan's claim is like, and we'd use evidence from those articles to back it up. In our next paragraph, we'd talk about the differences in their reasons. Again, we'd use evidence to back that up, and we'd do the same thing with tone and support. So here we're just working on coming up with evidence and coming up with points we want to discuss. But in our next video, or the video after that, we should be getting into actually writing the essay. But these are the things that we would talk about. So for instance, these 4 points would be our paragraphs, and then the information to the sides would be what we would discuss in those paragraphs. So that is it for this video. I'm going to have a self-check, just some practice that you can use in the Google Classroom as well. So be sure to do that if you're working on RLA or language arts. And again, we are open for students, so give us a call to schedule a time to come in for classes, for tutoring, things like that. And be sure to email us, Facebook message us, that type of thing, if you have any questions or concerns. Have a great day.